The wind carried a hush across the fading town, a hush that clung to the air like sorrow, too long unspoken. Golden dusk spread its veil over the clapboard houses and sagging storefronts, dust lifting in slow whirls around boots that passed her by without pause. Clara May Whitlock moved like a ghost down the street, eyes lowered, her thin figure wrapped in fabric too heavy for the warmth of evening. The sleeves were deliberate, covering what others had already seen once and never let her forget. "Best move along, girl," Sheriff Dalton Rourke had muttered that morning, his mouth tight, as though her presence alone soured the air. He'd not drawn his gun, nor his temper. His coldness had been punishment enough. The widow Martha Jenkins had done worse, standing at her bakery window, voice high enough for all to hear. That one's cursed, scarred from sin. Mothers tugged their children aside. Men looked and looked away again. The town had judged her long ago, and the sentence was exile in plain sight. So Clara had turned her steps beyond the last streetlight, toward the land that smelled of pine and freedom. Hunger burned her belly, shame burned her heart, but still she walked, boots crunching over gravel, until the shape of Elias Boone's ranch rose against the sky. The house stood plain but strong, porch shadowed in gold, fences stretching long and sure. And there, at the gate, she stopped, clutching the hem of her sleeve as though it could shield her from what must come. The man himself stood at the fence rail, hands thick and weathered from years of rope and plow, face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He was known for silence, for a gaze that pierced without cruelty. Clara swallowed, voice barely more than a reed trembling in the wind. "Mister," she whispered, "I'm looking for work." A breeze caught her sleeve as she spoke, and the fabric slipped enough to show the ridged line of a scar running down her arm. Elias's eyes fell to it, then stilled. His hand froze on the gate latch, a flicker of shock in his gaze. Not disgust, something heavier, something that looked too much like recognition. Clara's breath faltered. She braced for rejection, for the sharp edge of words that would cut deeper than any lash. But Elias Boone only studied her a moment longer. Then, in that low voice of his that carried more weight than a sermon, he said, "Barn needs sweeping. Supper's in an hour. You'll eat." She blinked, unsteady, caught between relief and suspicion. But the door to the barn creaked open, and work waited. That was mercy enough. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, dust motes swirling in beams of fading light. Clara moved with care, broom in her small hands, her body trembling not from labor, but from the strangeness of being allowed here at all. The boards groaned under her weight, but the silence was not cruel, not mocking. Outside, she heard boots on the dirt, then the sound of something set gently by the door. When she stepped closer, she found a bowl of stew, steam rising, and a thick slice of bread. Her lips parted. She lifted it, as though afraid it might vanish. Alone in the stall, she whispered, "Thank you." Elias Boone, leaning just beyond the doorframe, heard the words. He did not enter. He did not answer. But in the lantern glow, his face softened, if only for a breath. It was children who broke the stillness. The next afternoon, little Sammy and Ruthie from the neighboring ranch came scampering into the barn, their laughter bright and wild. They saw no shame in her scars, no curse in her thinness. Sammy tugged at her sleeve without fear. Ruthie pressed a wildflower into her palm. Clara felt something stir in her chest she had nearly forgotten, the fragile, aching bloom of a smile. Elias watched from the fence line, arms crossed, eyes narrowed not in judgment but in thought. He had known gossip, known the cruel tongues of town. But here, in the barn light, he saw something else, the way children saw her first, not as marked, but as human. His silence grew heavier with questions he would not yet voice. That night, Clara lay curled in the hay, the crust of bread held close like treasure. Shadows stretched across the rafters, and the smell of horses lulled her into a sleep she had not tasted in months. Outside on the porch, Elias sat with his pipe, smoke rising to the indifferent stars. He stared into the distance, restless, his mind circling the sight of her scars, the tremor in her hands. Burns? Lashes? He did not know. But the truth of them whispered louder than the town's gossip. Tomorrow might bring questions, gossip, even the sheriff's bootsteps up his path. But tonight, For the first time in too long, an outcast girl slept under his roof, and a man who thought his life already written found himself staring into the dark with questions that would not let him rest. Morning spilled across the valley in pale ribbons of light, gilding the meadow grass with dew. Clara knelt by the creek, sleeves rolled higher than she meant them to be, her hands submerged in cold water as she scrubbed linen against stone. For once, she forgot to hide. Scars, ridged and pale against her skin, caught the sunlight like old riverbeds carved deep into earth. She flinched when she felt a shadow fall over her. Elias Boone stood at the bank, boots planted in the damp soil. His eyes found the scars, lingered, but he did not look away. He looked through them, as if searching for the woman beneath the marks. Clara's breath caught. Most men turned aside quickly, lest pity betray them. Elias did not. He removed his hat, let the silence settle, and then simply nodded. Respect. Nothing more, nothing less. She lowered her gaze, but her chest tightened with something almost unbearable, to be seen and not scorned. By noon, tongues had found their way to town. Martha Jenkins, with flour dusting her apron, leaned across the bakery counter as Elias's wagon rolled past with Clara seated beside him. "Would you look at that?" she hissed, voice high with venom. He's parading her around as though she were kin. The whispers spread fast, through the saloon, the mercantile, even into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dalton Rourke caught Elias by the hitching rail. "Boone," he said flat, "a man with your standing ought to know better than keeping company with a girl like her." "Folks talk." Elias set his jaw, steady as oak. "Let him. You'll ruin your name." The sheriff pressed. "My name's mine," Elias said, voice low as thunder, "and her scars don't stain my land." He lifted the sack of feed onto his shoulder and walked away, leaving the sheriff staring after him. But Clara heard the whispers, heard them when she bent her head at the well, when women turned their backs at her passing. The words wrapped around her like chains. That night, long before dawn, she packed the small cloth bag that carried all she owned. Her hands shook as she tied the string. Better to leave now than drag Elias into the muck of her shame. She slipped to the gate, boots hushed in grass. But Elias was there already, leaning against the post, arms folded as though he'd been waiting all along. His voice was quiet, not sharp, but stilled her where she stood. "Running don't heal a thing, Clara May." Her chest heaved, tears stinging. She turned from him, but the truth spilled anyway, raw and broken. How her stepfather's hand had been cruel, how he'd left her marked with lash and iron, how the town had seen the scars and called her cursed, unclean. The words poured until she could not breathe, until she pressed her palms to her face like a child. Elias did not reach for her with easy comfort. He did not try to soften truth with hollow promises. Instead, he stepped close, slow, and set his weathered hand over hers, firm, steady. When she lifted her gaze, his eyes were clear. "Scars don't scare me," he said, voice low as the earth itself. And in that moment, something shifted. Her shame met his silence, and for the first time, she felt it lessen. But the town was not finished. Martha Jenkins's rumor grew like wildfire. The scarred girl had bewitched the rancher, had cursed his land. Within days, Sheriff Rourke rode out with 2 deputies, a small crowd trailing behind them like hungry dogs. They gathered at Boone's fence, dust rising beneath their boots, faces eager for spectacle. "Boone," the sheriff called. "Best send her off before worse comes of it. This town don't take kindly to danger in its midst." Clara's breath hitched. She stood just behind the porch rail, trembling, ready for rejection, ready to be cast out once more. The crowd's eyes pierced her like knives. Elias Boone stepped forward, his figure broad against the sky, pipe smoke still curling from his hand. His voice rolled deep, steady as the ground under their feet. "This ranch is mine. My table is mine. And she has a place at both." The air stilled. Not a horse stamped, not a crow cawed. The words landed heavier than any gunshot. The sheriff studied him a long moment, then, seeing no crack in Elias's gaze, shifted his reins. "So be it," he muttered, and turned his horse. The crowd, robbed of their spectacle, drifted back into the dust. Clara stood frozen, chest tight, her eyes burning with tears that would not fall. The weight of belonging pressed against her ribs, foreign and overwhelming. Elias met her gaze across the porch. No triumph in his eyes, only quiet certainty. No vows were spoken, no hands clasped in declaration. But something passed between them, silent, sure, like a river changing its course. That night, lantern lights spilled across the porch wood, the crickets stitching music into the still air. Clara sat with Elias in the quiet, her heart calmer than it had been in years. She traced the rim of her teacup, and for once did not hide her hands. Sometimes, scars are proof of what we survived. Sometimes, the quietest hands are the ones that lift us from the dust. And if you, dear soul, have ever felt marked by the world's judgment, remember this. Gossip fades, and cruelty weathers away. But dignity is not given, it is reclaimed. Often, it begins with the mercy of one person who sees us whole.